No, you're good right there. Yeah, just lean back a little bit.
Lean back. Okay.
Thank you for joining Shop Culture. This episode is brought in part by Mama Empanada. Mama Empanada 206.com. Green Tea Magazine, the hottest magazine in the Pacific Northwest. And Island Soul, islandsoulrestaurant.net. Links are posted on our page for more information. Please check those guys out because they have amazing products. Shop Culture will be bringing you the action live from Battle of the Barbers on June 23rd. More details are provided on our page as well. Tonight, we talk about the miniseries from Netflix, When They See Us. Kendrick Glover and Dr. Brian Hill are joining Shop Culture to shed some light on the discrepancies between the affluent, the people of those communities, and the people that are being targeted from their own government. This is Shop Culture. I am Twan the Voice, Barry, Terry, Danae. Let's talk.
All right, good evening, everybody. This is Shop Culture. We want to welcome everybody who is watching us right now on Facebook Live. Let me get a little microphone here so everybody can hear me just a little bit more. Yeah. It's live, folks. Want to welcome everybody for joining us here on Facebook Live. I am one of the hosts, Terry Youngman, along with
Crosby.
Danae.
All right, your usual suspects here, along with Twan the Voice. Along with Twan the Voice. And we are joined by two very, very special guests that are going to help us out with this great conversation that we got going on today. First is Mr. Kendrick Glover, the founder and director of GEM.
Yes, thank you guys for having me this evening. Looking forward to a very engaging dialogue.
All right, and also, last but certainly not least, Mr. Brian or Dr. Brian Hill, a former law enforcement officer and a psychiatrist, psychologist. So we want to thank him for coming on as well, Mr. Brian Hill.
And thank you.
First doctor we had, man. First doctor. No.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
We're going to have another doctor here, too.
Congratulations.
That's it, man. Black excellence. Black excellence.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we want to thank everybody watching. If you guys are watching us right now live, do us a favor and give us a like and share as we go along because it does a lot for the show as we go on. I want you to add a comment, let your voices be heard, although all of your comments might not be read live as we're going because you guys like to give us a lot of stuff, but keep it coming and we will get back to you as the week progresses. And later on in the show, we're going to be picking out some comments as well. How's everybody doing today?
Very good.
Yeah, everybody.
It's a beautiful day in the Pacific Northwest.
That's right. They act like we don't have them out here. It's always rain and gloom and doom, and this is not. It's beautiful out here. Come on out to the Pacific Northwest Seattle area and see how beautiful it is right now.
It's the best city in the country, man.
Hey man, hey, I wouldn't doubt it. Hey, I've been to a lot of places, and
I love Seattle.
I said there's no place like home.
I don't know about the best city, but it's okay. It's beautiful, definitely. That's for sure.
It's up for debate.
It's up in the way. Look, there's no place
People
like
here
home.
could be a little more genuine. Let's say it like that.
Oh,
Whoa. You know what she's talking about.
dang it, today I'm over here trying to give a shout out to our family. You over here.
Already talking about brothers.
Yeah, she said people. Like looking around. Yeah, well, it is a great city, regardless of what some people might think. But I'm sure that everybody loves where they're at, but this is a great place. So we have a lot to talk about today, and one of the things we want to cover, we've been off for the last couple of weeks, and we're a little bit behind on the series, the mini-series, When They See Us, as far as our coverage here on this show is concerned. So we're going to get on it today because it has been a big topic of discussion all over the world, all over the social media sites, all over the news sites, and anything in entertainment. People have been talking about the Central Park 5 case once again brought back into the light thanks to this docu-series, mini-series that's on Netflix.
It's too short.
By Ava DuVernay, the great director. And so it's back in the contest now, and we have some great people here to talk about it with us and discuss it and try to figure out how we can start, having to open up these dialogue and the conversation to build a bridge between law enforcement and the Black and brown communities. First and foremost, did everybody get a chance to check out the film itself.
Yes.
Did you guys get to check it out?
Mhm.
So yeah, the film, it follows the story of the Central Park Five. It's a case that happened in 1989, which the members were the people that were convicted for a crime that they did not commit, which was later on found out. But it made national news back in 1989. Raymond Santana, Corey Wise, Yusuf Salem, Antron McCrae, and Kevin Richardson, all minors at the time,
Young.
were all convicted of the rape of a young white woman, a young jogger, who was in Central Park, and by most accounts, and according to what the movie had kind of portrayed it and showed, they looked to be coerced into false statements without parents, without legal counsel, and they gave false reports to the police that ended up landing them in jail over the different stretches of time, from some ranges from 6 years all the way to 14 years at the longest. And they did the time for a crime that they didn't commit, which later on they do find the actual perpetrator of the crime with the DNA evidence to have him convicted. So first thoughts, not just on the case, but just on the movie itself. What did you guys think about the movie and how they portrayed all of this? And then we'll get to the real thing.
Yeah, I thought the movie's excellent. I honestly, I was shocked how in depth it was. Pretty realistic from all the findings and readings I did, because I did a lot of research on the issue. And being a father to a 11-year-old boy, they're difficult conversations, but you have to have these type of conversations with them. And it is, I think everybody needs to watch. Not just people of color, but everybody needs to watch it, because this is what's going on. So yeah.
Mr. Kendrick Glover, what did you think about the film itself?
Oh man, powerful. I had an opportunity to have a sit down with Brother Yusuf Salam last year when I was in DC, and hear the story in its entirety. And
Good brother, man.
it was very powerful, very moving, but it was also very reminiscent. And I'll tell you why in a minute, because I think not to try to steal any thunder, but that story is all too familiar within the community of color and throughout the United States. So I wasn't surprised by it.
Were you familiar with this case prior to the movie?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Dr. Hill, have you had a chance to watch the film?
No, unfortunately, I have not. But from what I'm hearing, certainly I think there's historical aspects, not only in fictional. I think the movie was it Rosewood with where they had the African American was accused of rape in the 1800s.
In Florida.
So there's aspects of that, and then unfortunately is another episode in both the saga of African Americans in the criminal justice system, as well as from the law enforcement standpoint. It's difficult, in my opinion, to continue to dig from basically a generalization if you continue to have episodes like this.
Yeah.
Again, generalizations isn't just race, it is cultural too. And law enforcement's a culture. Just like any culture, including employees at Amazon, for example, you're going to have good people and bad people. But hopefully, in general, that culture is made of good people.
Right.
So again, it's very difficult, in my opinion. I don't want to steal thunder here, but it's very difficult, in my opinion, to dig out of a generalization if you continue to have episodes, especially toward a race of people who have seen it historically, time and time again.
Right.
Twan.
A question that came from Anthony Smith is, are stats on different races fact? Do the police use stats on how to deal with a situation based on the different races? And as you get in, is that the same kind of calls that you get for more urgency because of races?
I want to real quick before you answer that, because I want to finish just the talking about the movie part, because that's going to go right into our actual discussion of the case. That's a great question. That's a great question. So we're definitely going to table that for just a second and get back to him on that. Well, real quick, my overview of the movie. I reviewed it on my page last week, and I gave it very high marks. It was a tough watch. It wasn't an easy watch, especially when you're watching this play out and dramatize. And one of the things that I've been seeing over the course of the last week or so since this film was released on Netflix, a lot of people, there's a lot of outrage. People are mad and upset, and and now the whole thing has been brought back up. As you know, the Linda Fairstein, who was the prosecutor in the case, she's been brought back up, and people have now been boycotting her. She became a famous crime novelist and such, and people are boycotting her books on Amazon and all these other things, and having her. Yeah. Well, okay, but and so all of that, she's been really brought up, and so a lot of people have really this whole case has been brought back into pop culture zeitgeist, and one of the issues is that people, the pushback is like, well, why is everybody choosing now to get upset about this? This was 30 years old, and now it takes a movie for you guys to get upset about this, and everybody just wants to be mad about something, and blah blah blah. One of the important things I think about this work being released and just being there for us is that there's a lot of bad stuff that happens in the world all the time, all year round. And so we're not always thinking about everything that happened forever, because we really dig it. If we really went day by day, and had a calendar, we could come up with this day in whatever year this crime happened or whatever. There's always something. So when these things come back up, it's a story that really did need to be told and addressed, and to see this dramatized version of this, and see the people actually play out is different than you just hearing the story, you're hearing a news clip about it. You see it actually play out. You can relate to the characters, all of them, the law enforcement agents too, from their perspective.
Well, you had the ones that wanted to do something, but they couldn't because of the culture. So exactly, and then it was a classism too, because it dealt with poor people.
Right, and this is something that, again, it's one thing to hear it, but when you actually see it and watch it, we as black men or anybody who's been wrongfully accused of things at certain times, or people have been put in position of law enforcement or anything like that, it does do something when you actually see these things play out, and where you are, you can definitely relate differently to it. But I want to go ahead and address the question that he asked. Well, Twan, go ahead and read that question one more time so he can get to that.
Are stats on different races factual? Do the police use those same stats on dealing with particular situations? Are some calls more urgent based on different racial profilings?
Right. Not necessarily more urgent. Usually urgency is, they operate under a priority system, and it comes from the type of call that happens. So there's not a sense of urgency based on a particular race or a particular neighborhood. Statistics are used in law enforcement. I mean, in my career, the infamous racial profiling cases came about, after which it was a column around the country to collect statistics on the different types of different classifications of races that you were having encounters with. In response to that, I'm just going to say this kind of objectively versus my opinion to it, because it differs. My opinion to it differs.
Go ahead.
But objectively, law enforcement has, in my view, responded by creating programs to try to resolve issues, again,
when you say programs,
like profiling,
Is it
not
profiling?
profiling, programs. So they come up with one of the famous ones is community-oriented policing or problem-solving policing. Now, I could talk about problem solving from a scientific standpoint and what that actually means. And in my opinion, they're not equal to each other. But I will add this, and this is coming from me more so than my personal opinion, and kind of my learned opinion, and that is this. Conflict and conflict resolution means that people understand positions of a problem, and then they work together to resolve them. They come up with solutions together, not independently or not unilaterally, to resolve issues. And sometimes I find that vacant or absent from both positions, unfortunately, toward resolving problems.
Yeah, how's that effective? I don't see the efficiency in that.
Yeah, I mean, if you were responding to create a program based on a perceived difficulty or situations versus actually identifying what the problem is and working to resolve it through a collection of solutions or collection of suggestions to solutions from both sides,
Right.
then you are operating unilaterally. You operate under the guise of again, this is my opinion, but you operate under the guise of I know more about it than you do, so I come up with solutions, and I'm not even going to take what you're thinking into account.
Well,
In
all
your
this,
opinion, you feel like the system is failing, basically.
Well, in my opinion, I think that the reactions to issues becomes more universal, or excuse me, more predominant than trying to resolve the problem.
Now, is these false arrests still happening today? Because I believe it's still happening today for our African American brothers.
Yeah, well, of course, I don't have any empirical data on that. But, I mean, again, I talk in therapy, I talk about history predicts the future, but it doesn't dictate it. But clearly, if you have a history that is continued from the 1800s through the early part of the 1900s and into 2000, it indicates, in my opinion, that you're trying to address symptoms and not fix the problem.
that's a good point. I want to ask you something real quick, Kendrick, because you had said something earlier that it was very familiar to you, and I want to let you touch on that because you mentioned that.
No, thank you. And Doc, I appreciate the role that you play, because I can only imagine how uncomfortable it is to stay true to the blue and what they call it, but then also stay true to who you are as an African American man. And you touched on some things that, in all respect, I like to disagree with, because when we talk about police patrolling, we know for a fact that they patrol high crime neighborhoods more often than they do affluent neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So right here in the city of Kent, at any given time, you can drive in a 2-block radius and see 2-3 police cars.
Right.
But you go 2 miles up the street going towards Covington, you'll never see a police car.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with? That has to do with property value. That has to do with the location of your home.
Yeah.
That has to do with the type of industries and businesses that are located around you.
But it also has to do with the further out you go to a more rural area, the less law enforcement you can get. Cities will have more law enforcement officers than counties across the board. I mean, that just happens. And so, so it is also part of that. Again, I will agree with you about some of those aspects, but some of it is population density and the number of officers you have in that density. I mean, clearly out in the county, it is very sparse.
And also another one of the things that you kind of said when you alluded to what was going on, you kind of alluded to the fact when you called it a high crime area.
Yeah.
And I think so that would also be why there would be more patrolling, but that goes into a larger thing about being put in poor situations and all of that.
Yeah.
Stuff. So I mean, there's a lot.
A whole
nother-
Let me speak to just one aspect of it.
Hold on. Yeah. We'll let Juan and we come
Right.
back to him.
Josh Mylan actually had pointed out two specific areas in our region, one being Kent and the other one being Auburn. How does that factor in as well with what you're going to say, Doctor?
With
Those being two high crime areas and the responses.
So what I was going to say, not necessarily in particular those areas, but into what high crime is in what crime is in general. Crime is crime. And so high crime, i.e. An arrest for bucks or a drug offense, that criminal act is the same criminal act, not the same criminal classification or the same punishment as someone breaking into your house, a burglary. And the areas I patrolled were predominantly white. The contacts I had were predominantly white, and the arrests that I made were predominantly white. I mean, it is the neighborhoods, and what happens criminally. High crime areas, crime happens all over the place. But I do, again, I'm not going to push back from the fact that situations like this, the generalizations that happen, do happen, and it is unfortunate.
And let's get to that. I want to really touch on that though, because we got to get to the.
We're gonna jump right into it. But I just want to say, I like the usage of terminology. However, if we're gonna be real and we're gonna talk about what's happening right now today, right now in King County, we only make up 6% of the population, but we make up 55% of the incarcerated population.
Exactly.
So I don't see no generalization. That's targeted. Like there's no other way to put it. That's targeted.
And that's what I was going to say.
Anytime right now, you can go to King County Jail or you can go to the juvenile detention, and 8 out of 10 inmates are going to be people of color.
Exactly. And then they're also not only are they dealing with the fact that we are incarcerated more, but we also get harsher penalties as well.
So this is what this case is about.
Right.
This is what this case is about. They identified 5 young brothers of color in a predominantly people of color neighborhood and chose them.
Well, and not only that,
and they were selected.
They automatically were guilty. And then one of the things that I'm going to give back to Twan is just say, the media, if you were, when I was doing the research on this, they kind of touched on this in the movie, but they didn't tell it exactly. 90% of the coverage in the New York area that was covering this was never using the words, during the trial, they never used the words alleged. They were calling them rapists. They were calling them the actual perpetrators of the crime before their day in court had actually happened. So the perception was there.
Put a black face to the crime.
Right.
I think we're missing a very important point that a lot of people know about, but they don't bring up. So let me ask you this question. What if that full-page ad was never taken out in the New York Times? Do you think those guys would have been found guilty?
Was Donald Trump ad?
Yeah.
Well, I think they still would have been found guilty.
But it would have been to that severity because of who he was at that particular time and the business that he ran in New York City and the ownership that he had in the New York Times and with the judges on that bench.
Right.
Do you think that case would have made those headlines like it did? I'm going to say no.
Maybe not the
headlines.
Maybe not the headlines.
I think
they still would have. The police kind of wanted them to be the guys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Go ahead, Twan.
You know what? Josh Mylan actually came back and wanted to clarify something. He meant profiling as well, not just the crime.
Okay.
And he said that back in the 90s, he did a lot of dirt on East Hill, but also saw that a lot of his friends were profiled and felt that he could get away with it or get a free pass because he was white and they weren't.
Yeah.
And Terry Youngman came in and asked senior. My apologize. Big Daddy Terry came through.
Caucasian will get a slap on the wrist versus us, we'll get, a really, really harsh penalty. Like it's like one of them served for 14 years almost.
Right. That's not even.
But he was serving life. He only was released because of the guy coming forward and testifying and confessing to the crime. He would still be in there right now, Corey Wise.
That's crazy.
Go ahead, read.
Terry Youngman Sr. said people were getting killed in that area of the Central Park on a regular basis, and that's also true that nobody has really thrown out there to the forefront.
Well, in the movie, the detective even said that if you look at the case, there were 4 other rapes that happened in the same area within a week's time.
Right. Well,
and they were all connected to that one guy, but nobody ever thought to mention, hey, did we take a look at the DNA of this case versus the others?
Well, and the thing was that the DNA, that was a part of the case. They knew there was no DNA. There was none.
Yeah.
There was no DNA evidence.
Well, they kept on saying they had to, that's what I meant, but none, zero.
Terry Youngman Sr. said that it was a real thing all over the country, especially in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Mr. Jason Brown said that there was one similar situation recently just here in Renton, Washington, which is what, the next city up, another 10 miles or so?
What
He didn't expound on that. Jason Brown, please let us know.
Similar situation.
Similar situation.
We would like to hear about that.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the thing was, you had a situation where you heard white jogger, and then you heard black and brown suspects guilty. That was already it was already predetermined that these people did it. And this is the problem, and this is something that I want to ask you about from your experience in law enforcement, because with such a history of this, again, this is something that happened 30 years ago. People like us, though, have heard these stories. When we've seen these stories, they still happen. They've always played out this way. And so these kind of things, where you know that the game is rigged almost for the brothers, at least, you know, for blacks and browns, and we feel that way because of what we see around us. With there being such distrust between blacks, browns, and the police officers in blue, you know, what can somebody in your position do to try to bridge that, to try to be fair as a black cop?
I would tell you,
This is good stuff.
the last thing that I did, the first thing I did when I went to work was put on my uniform. But the last thing that I did was act as a law enforcement officer. And I talked to people. I talked to people as people. And I looked at my job as a law enforcement officer. I mean, I didn't have to go out and look for or target or, throw my machismo around.
You had a relationship with the people.
I just talk to people. I mean, and I do the same thing as a psychologist too. I mean, it's important to understand that people are people. And I actually think that that's an important thing to understand when we have these discussions, that people are people. Like I said earlier, you know, you will find bad people in every circle.
That's actually a rare cop. You know, I mean, you're a rare commodity. Most of the policemen that I've encountered, you know, they're very aggressive. Number one, they come off as very aggressive.
In your experience,
really, not just in my experience, just in overall. Most police officers come off as very aggressive. They come off as very authoritative. I feel like, okay, you're supposed to protect and serve. This is not how you address people. If you address people, you know, with respect, you know, or with dignity, then they'll have a better response to you. Right. You know, instead of being so authoritative or so aggressive toward people, that's going to put people on a, you know, what's the word I'm looking for?
Hostile.
Hostile. Defensive. Defensive.
And I've also seen it vice versa too. Like, I mean, out here in the alley, behind the shop, seeing a young brother just going off, and I was like, "Damn, really?" You know,
the police officer.
Which is silly to me in this day and age.
Police officers are insane.
Well,
you know what? That's a perfect one. Thank you so much, Danae, for trying to identify a city. You said that Kent is insane. Meanwhile, Josh Milam said that he had been beaten up, even being a white male in Renton, and that they might be the worst. Do you guys, number one, feel like a certain city has a stronger, you know, pool as far as racial profiling? Does one city profile more than another city? And then Terry Youngman Sr. asked, or actually he said, and like we got to see how much you guys agree with this statement. He said that people, generally, black people, are more inclined to be harassed by police, and that they've been the face of brutality and crime in this nation for centuries.
Especially here.
That's a pretty much pretty known fact for most of us. But again, I think we got to be careful too when we are getting into this discussion, because you open up a lot of room for contradiction and error when we say generalizations, when we say things like all cops are this and all cops are that, because then somebody's going to come in. But the thing is, we always have to put it through the lens of our personal experience and what we see. And I'm not saying that you're wrong, because I would be inclined to agree with you based on my experience and probably your experience. Probably, I'm sure I can look at any brother, and they probably have had a similar situations as me. But one thing we have to be careful of is saying the generalizations, because then somebody can make the case for the other side of that. Well, I do want to ask you though, what do you think about the comment that was made about the fact that generally everywhere, blacks are usually the face of crime? I think, like, when you guys are, aren't black men number one male? Isn't that what they refer to them as? The police isn't that number one male when they're describing something?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I thought that was. I've heard that term used before a couple of times.
I can't. I don't know if I would do that. The reason why I get really hesitant to doing it is again because African Americans have been generalized as something for years. Yeah. And part of this conversation is about to not use your perception toward us, your beliefs about us.
Talking about us and
us as African Americans.
Okay,
not use your beliefs and perceptions about African Americans, but see us who we are.
Yeah.
See us is what? Kendrick. Sorry, I'm sorry. Kendrick and Barry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. See us for who we are. I mean, again, I grew up in the early 60s before civil rights. And one of the examples I use in therapy is to say that had I adopted society's belief that African Americans at that time, it wasn't too long before that, when African Americans going to higher education, college, was illegal in parts of the country.
Oh, yeah.
If I adopted that view of societal's take on how I can accomplish, I certainly wouldn't have an advanced degree. Neither would you be working for it.
Well, what was the push to push you in that direction of law enforcement, coming from such an era of discrimination and blacks versus police violence against blacks, and growing up in such a time like that? What would push a young black man into law enforcement?
Currently, that's a very good question.
Okay.
Back when I started in the early 90s, it was still an admirable career. I mean, it was still a career that was respectful, was professional, and something that you could do until you retired, because I did retire eventually. This day and age, again, I will have to use this as my opinion, and I'm not speaking for the law enforcement professional. But my opinion is there has been a cultural sea change in law enforcement toward more procedural aspects versus more human aspects.
Break that down.
Yeah.
Break that down.
So,
procedural.
Well, I could give you an example of it. So an example of it is when I started, the department manual, the policies for law enforcement, plus we had additional material for trainings for how to respond, or the aspects you should look for when responding to certain calls.
Right.
Those two things combined, so policies and procedures was half of this. It's about 330 pages.
Right.
When I retired, it was over 900.
Wow.
Again, but to me, that speaks to part of the problem. you try to create a procedure for every single aspect of what you handle as a law enforcement officer. The thing that forgets is that law enforcement officers, just like you and you and you and all of us, relate to people.
Right, and you take the personal aspect out of that when it's so robotic and by the book and this is what you got to do this and that, and then all that is about perception, right?
And again, it certainly adds to the perception of.
Right.
It certainly adds to the perception of, again, authoritarian. You're here to do something to me versus figure out what's going on.
Instead of having that interaction of personal connections.
Interactions of personal connection, and believe it or not, interactions of personal connection is built into what we call levels of proof in law enforcement.
Do you think police
Every
officers
single thing.
should have to live in the area that they serve, though?
No, I don't. I don't think it, because again, it certainly would be nice, but I don't think that it is if you, again, look at it from what you're doing. You're and it's not even you're handling humans. That also would feed into stereotypes and us versus them and just like that. It is that you are working with folks in a community in order to further the values of the community.
Right. Well, I think that a lot of these police officers that don't work in the area or don't live in the area that they're working don't understand the neighborhoods, and then that's an issue that comes with it too.
Yeah.
Is they come into our neighborhoods because I'm from Gary, Indiana, and Gary, Indiana could be considered the ghetto or the hood, but it's really not. No, it's not. A lot of
rape murder capital.
I mean, yeah, it is. Wait. There's a lot of strong, educated Black families in Gary, Indiana. So if you come into our neighborhoods with that mentality that, oh, this is just a ghetto or this is a murder capital, then you're gonna come aggressive when there, our neighborhoods are neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods are kids playing in the streets. Our neighborhoods are our mothers and fathers and grandmothers and sisters and brothers and aunties. These are our neighborhoods. So if you come at it in, oh, this is the murder capital, you're gonna come very aggressive.
Well, and I think what you're kind of speaking to is kind of one of the things is what we were touching on earlier about the surroundings and where people are at, the poor neighborhoods and things like that. It's not a mystery why crime is high in these areas. When people, aren't getting the jobs that they're supposed to get, and when people are automatically growing up around drug dealers and hoes and prostitutes and pimps and all of this kind of stuff like that, when those are your surroundings, if we understand that, if we would have law enforcement that understand that automatically, maybe some interactions would change with the people because they would understand and look at it from that lens, rather than expect them all to act the same as somebody who lives in a rich neighborhood or something like that. You kind of understand the condition a little bit more. Is that something that you guys train for, and understanding why these people's conditions are the way they are?
I trained for it in psychology.
Yeah. I'm talking about law.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What?
Kendrick, what experience do you have training for hostile situations in hostile environments? You deal with youth. You deal with youth from broken homes that may have trouble.
Yes. I mean, you first. I'm a person that I love and respect numbers. So it's a numbers game. I can only imagine what it was like in the 90s for you to be a Black officer. I know you had racial slurs thrown at you. I know for a fact that you had all this stuff happening to you. So
I would give you some numbers.
No, I can only imagine. But for our young people, our youth and young adults, as I call them, and I use that term, youth and young adults, when I'm talking about anybody 24 and under. So let's just clarify that. Those young brothers and sisters, or young people in general, have an understanding of what it feels like to be invisible.
Yeah.
To understand what it feels like to not be heard, to be voiceless. And for me, I was one of those people. So a lot of factors played into why I serve in the role that I serve in today, which is working with youth and young adults and starting my own nonprofit agency and working on, not taking down the system, but disrupting it, not dismantling it, because you can never dismantle a system that was designed to oppress people at a rate that was unjust and unfair. You oftentimes think about why does crime happen in neighborhoods more frequently in neighborhoods of color than they do in white neighborhoods. And like I said, it goes back to redlining. When you talk about people of color being boxed in, that's a true fact. We're boxed into certain communities, and when you see certain businesses and communities, you know what type of people live there. You know you're not going to see, as the old saying go, a liquor store in Bellevue on Bellevue Way. If you do, it's going to be upscale with security guard at the door. It's going to be not. It's going to look almost like a shopping mall, right? But when you come to neighborhoods like Kent, you're going to run into something with the door halfway open, bars on the window. I mean, it's just a perception of how we are perceived and we are given things as well.
And you grow up in an area like that, who's going to commit more crimes? Somebody who grows up in a poor area like that, or somebody who comes up with money living in a nice area?
Yeah, but think about just everything. How we even got to this point to where we are in these neighborhoods with high crime. It's all stemmed from our history, our horrible history in America. So,
and when you think about it, this is why we all, when we make it to that level of what we determine as success for ourselves, we leave.
Yeah.
Instead of
staying. And that's true.
That's instead of building,
Go ahead, Tom.
So Mr. Anthony Smith asked, is it not because of the decisions that some people make that they're perceived as hostile and are approached that way? He said that sometimes he sees that the cops have to come clean up some people's mess. Is that a contributing factor to them presenting themselves as hostile when they encounter people?
Well, he said bad decisions.
I think that you should never approach any situation hostile, because you're bringing that type of energy to the situation. As cops, you're already the authority figure. Everyone already knows that you're the authority figure. So I don't think that you have to present that to people. You know what I'm saying? So in any situation, if I come to this situation hostile and authoritative, then that's the type of energy I'm going to get back. So I think that it's just you're vibrating off of each other.
Are you talking about isolated? Well, I mean, because when you say that, like, what do you mean? Like, if somebody has a gun, I mean, what do you
mean? I don't understand your question.
Well, what do you mean? Sometimes you have to gauge the situation.
You do have to gauge the situation.
So just to say you never to come, I mean, you're still human.
You can't come to you. I mean, as a police officer, what I'm saying is that you are already an authority figure. Everyone already recognizes you as an authority figure. You don't have to display that to people.
Well, I would go one step further, and I would say is when a call is made, it's on the dispatcher to prep the officer on what they're going into that situation for. So whatever information, and correct me if I'm wrong, whatever information you're given by the dispatcher, that's where your mind takes you to be prepared for this situation. Now, this is domestic violence. It's a difference if there's no weapon involved. But if someone calls and says a weapon is involved, automatically you got to gear up. And I don't blame you because you make it protect yourself.
No.
Yes, but still don't come.
No. Again, if it was that easy, it would be nice.
Okay.
Because there is not a single officer out there that's been issued a crystal ball. We don't know what we're going into, despite the information that we get. Calls go bad quickly all the time.
So
There's been some calls that I thought were clearly innocent, where I found out that I was in high danger.
Yeah.
But I'm going to piggyback on what you said about you should not approach any situation hostile. That has to be on both sides of the fence. That cannot just be law enforcement saying we need to back off and it's okay if you yell at us. It has to be on both sides of the fence. Again, problem resolution is both sides contributing solutions to fix the problem.
Okay. But that's your job as an officer. It is your job to isolate the situation. I mean, to resolve the situation. That's your job as an officer. Yeah. It's not my job. I am emotional. I am going through distress right now. We're in a domestic dispute right now. Tensions are high. As an officer coming in to protect and serve, it's your responsibility to calm the situation down. How are you going to do that if you're
I think you're giving way too much credit to the police. Do you know how long it takes to become a police officer? Not that long.
Not that long.
No, you can become a police officer in 8 to 10 weeks.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I have to change it.
Longer than that.
I'm just saying, but once you
pretty
Maybe
far.
education. Maybe you guys need to, take
We got a
your
question
classes
here.
on psychology or something or whatever. But I think that it's a way that you can approach a situation that is not authoritative and be. I dissolve conflict all the time. All the time. I deal with a lot of conflict. I'm from
Not in life or death situation.
Yeah. Hey, Terry, I'm trying to be quiet now.
Whatever.
I'm trying to be quiet.
I have dealt in life and death situations too.
No, but not on a
Yes,
regular basis.
I'm sure you be God too.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man.
All right, well, we got.
I expect more from you, officer.
I want to get right back to that. Go ahead.
Barbershop too, right?
I gotta go. We got a question. Go ahead.
We had a lot of comments. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and writing to us. If we are not able to get to you live here on the air, trust me, we will be watching this back and responding to all of you. Absolutely. Aaron Smith said that black folks need to come to a point where we stop using our history as an excuse not to do better. Ms. Janice Dawson pointed out Kent and Renton need powerful people who will invest in those communities with deep pockets and influence over the council and Chamber of Commerce. It's all about money. She also mentioned that the person that runs the city of Bellevue does not play, and that's why you don't see some of those same issues in such a place like Bellevue.
Barber closed. You know they don't play.
Mr. Terry Youngman Sr. Says that most people are to act like civilized people at all times.
I want to question the history part because
Okay.
Yeah, I was about to say that, but
Right,
don't
right,
let
right.
I'm not your history away. No.
Once you know your history, you have a duty
Exactly.
to speak on it.
Thank you.
So if you don't know your history as an African American and what people have done to you and your ancestors and still do, tell me one time right now you can name 6 instances off the top of your head when you've been racially profiled by white people or anybody else, even your own brothers and sisters. So when you talk about your history, we got to not use that as an excuse.
Yeah.
I'm not saying using that as an excuse. I'm just saying you bring it to the light like this has always happened and it's continuing to happen.
And
So why is that an
also
excuse?
to that point too. One of those things though about history. I just want to make one point though. When they say history, you just said as a kid you were alive during the civil rights movement. That wasn't that long ago. This is not. They always try to treat Black history
Like
and
it's
racial
so
stuff
long
like it was ancient history.
Exactly.
That was
That's
50,
still
60 years ago.
happening.
So-
A police officer just shot a woman who screamed that she was pregnant. The woman also had a mental illness at that. He shot her 5 times.
Yeah.
5 times, cold blank, shot her for no reason.
Right. And
That's
one of
still
the
happening
things
today.
I want to
So we're
ask.
supposed to throw our. It's not history.
It's not history.
It's happening. Everyday living.
I want to ask you too, though. When you see, what does it do for you when you see the video footage of police shootings that happen against unarmed Black men getting killed without having anything, with their hands up, whatever the situation is? What does it do for you as a law enforcement agent, and what is your relationship to any situation like that throughout your history that you might have heard of or been privileged to, or not privileged, but unfortunately?
Well, it's difficult. And so, again, just like any person, I'm an emotional person, and I look at those things from standpoints of effective. But I do try to push away from them because I don't want to analyze what's going on. Again, law enforcement and situations you go to are so fluid and so rapidly fluid that it's hard to say this is what's going on. I saw it on this much of the media, and that's absolute. It is hard to say that. Even situations I've been involved in, even situations I was involved in where I later saw them on the news and it was completely incorrect, and I was at the scene.
Which were, like, an example?
Well,
Just
I was at the scene of a landslide that the media made to sound like it washed out a road, and believe me, it didn't even wash out a ditch. So that's just a minor example. But but I won't say that. I also am on the hill that two things happen. One is those situations shouldn't spur discussion. It shouldn't happen to begin with, because not that we've tried to create a policy to cover it, but we've created a profession that is in place to be professional in those situations. Again, I think part of the problem, part of removing professionalism is the proceduralizing.
Yeah.
Why is it? Because it takes a human element out of it.
Yeah.
But one point I will make to something that was said earlier, and that is putting money in neighborhoods. You got to be careful with that because gentrification still happens.
Yeah. It's happening.
And
Look at Central District.
yeah, certain neighborhoods
Yeah.
will be affluent quickly when everything else around it is crumbling. So if you're putting money in a neighborhood, it doesn't necessarily improve the neighborhood.
No.
It might just raise the property values.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a good point. Go ahead.
The last thing that we really are going to get into is Terry Youngman Sr. asked. Actually, he said that too many brothers have fallen into the trap of the stereotype. That's why we have to constantly pay attention and better ourselves. You have all been through this community with that target on your back before you were born. What is it that you were told as a young person growing up knowing that, and how have you tried to navigate, and what can the young people of today's society do to not become another statistic of somebody that's being gunned down by gun violence or police brutality?
That's a good way to try to wrap this up. Let's go ahead and get into some of the solutions
Solution,
that we
right.
see. What do we think? I want to go around the table. We'll start with Dr. Hill and ask you, what do you think are some of the solutions that can be done to start changing and helping this epidemic from going on?
So I think two things. One is I'm going to address what I was told, and that is, and I told my son this too. So you want to talk about generational? It continues, and that is, you're probably going to have to work 10 times as hard as a Caucasian person to be even with them. So my solution is this. My solution is this. One of the things I talk about, and again, I'm related to therapy too, because that's what I do, is society puts labels. Society uses labels quite a bit. They become shortcuts because just like you individually in perceptions of shortcuts, it's because we take in so much that we need ways to categorize. Our brain can't process every single bit of information that comes in. So one of the ways that society does its shortcut is to label stuff. So what I tell people is don't believe a label. Be who you are and move in a direction that is beneficial to you, including the labels of the groups of people or peers that you're with too. Move in a direction that is beneficial for you.
Right.
Because again, in the long run, whatever happens, you're doing for yourself.
Right.
So to me, that's important. It's important to do that. I've overcome some things like a learning disability to get a doctorate. So you don't have to buy into
Don't be prisoner to a label.
you don't have to be prisoner to a label and the stigmas that go with those labels.
Kendrick.
First and foremost, it's still stuck with me because I hear that a lot. Well, where we talk about don't make those type of excuses. But let's not forget the shoulders of the brothers and sisters that we stand upon. So we forget that history, and we disrespect the people that have paved the way for us to even be trying to be considered as equals.
Legacy.
So that needs to be dismissed in all of our language because we're doing exactly what they want them to do. What they want us to do is forget where we came from.
And every other culture encourages themselves to remember their history.
Yes, they
American history.
They have parades about it. They have plays about
Black
it.
history is American history. Let's remember.
I gotta ask Anthony this. It's kind of a blessing that life is not fair.
Huh?
Well,
You lost me.
What's your logic?
Whoa.
No, hold on. Okay.
I mean,
All right, so yeah, Anthony
I'm sorry, I've
Smith.
seen that.
Anthony Smith, was responding back primarily to Kendrick, but to the panel as well,
Okay.
and said it's kind of a blessing, like that life is not fair.
I think that's in a very roundabout. We learn from our lessons kind of way, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still gonna suck for the person who's in prison for 14 years for a crime that they didn't commit.
Those
So, I mean,
brothers were locked up.
those people that got that, they would beg to differ.
I would encourage you to talk to.
We can dialogue, brother.
So what I feel like we need
Right.
to do,
Yeah.
I feel like we need to have conflict resolution. Police officers, they need to either pay them more, they need more training, maybe psychology, so that they can understand people, understand their minds, so that they can understand these situations that they're going into. They need to psychology, or they need to check these officers mentally, making sure that they're correct in their head, they're correct in their personal life, they're not, overly aggressive or racist or, whatever. I think that as an officer, you should be held to a higher standard, So police academy, y'all need to upgrade. Y'all need to get some psychology. Y'all need to get some problem solving, conflict resolution, things like that. Pay these officers more. Get some real, true, genuine people who are trying to help the community in these positions.
Then why don't you become a police officer? Sound like you have all the. I mean, right? She sounds like she'd be good at it.
She said reasons. Reasons.
I would not be good as a police officer.
And if you know that, that's identifying it and knowing it right
You
away.
can do something in the community.
I do a lot in the
No, I'm just saying, like
community.
something like law enforcement, something like
I
that.
do a lot in the community. I do spoken word, so I the power of words
Moves people.
moves people, exactly. So
Anthony Smith, corresponding with that, Anthony Smith said that he feels like the police shouldn't have to do anything except hold the order and make sure that the law is not being broken. He also said that he believes that it's a cop's job to hold the order, and that there are some people that aren't breaking law, but he believes that really the only way is for them to hold the order and not do much else.
Well, we got to remember where policing came from in America, because policing was never a thing in America. It was something that was what do you want to call it? It was something that was emulated or something that was duplicated from another society,
Right.
because we couldn't come up with it on our own.
No, there was laws, and then it morphed into what it's become now.
Yes, and it's, as people don't like talking about this, but it's based around slavery.
That's a big
What
part.
was a slave catcher?
Yeah.
So if you really want to go into history,
Black history is
Really
American
think
history,
about it.
people. That's what it is.
Before we speak on subjects, let's really be mindful about the sensitivity of it, because it will bring up some very uncomfortable truths that people are not willing to deal with, and they are going to be biased to it because they're going to believe what they believe.
And some people don't want to see it.
And some
And
people don't
I
want to
do. I believe in a system. I really do believe in a system. But
No, this is what she does.
this is what I do.
Barry, we gotta get your.
Real quick. Stuff like this. Interaction, having people, the police officers, having people within the community. We talk, we discuss, and come up with some type of resolutions.
Yeah.
And hopefully, Dr. Bryan can give us some insight about how our young kids can deal with police officers when, they're in interaction with them.
Yeah.
And that's stuff that's we need.
Yeah.
We need those steps.
Right. Well, I for my real brief, quick thing, I would think of. I mean, obviously, it's not going to get solved in a day, but things like this, open discussions, talking about. We got to stop this thing that's going on in society now, especially with social media and everything. Everybody wants to chirp along with the same people and talk to the same people that think and agree with the same things. That's not the way that we're going to ever fix anything. We got to reach across the aisle. We need to talk and discuss with people that don't look like us, the people on the other side than us, and try to come and tell them our story and listen to their story and try to come to something together. And we got to remember our history. Those who don't remember their history are doomed to repeat it. And if you look at where you said you were raised in, my parents, our grandparents from the civil rights era, we got a lot of these same things coming back to this day. The 1989 case with the Central Park 5 is something all too reminiscent of things that we see to this day happening every single day. And if we didn't learn from it before, that's why it's still happening now. We got to open up the discussions. We got to change something and it's going to take everybody to do it. I want to thank everybody who's been watching us. I want to thank our guest, Dr. Brian Hill, for coming on. Doing, man.
My guy.
Good thing, man. Real talk. We want to talk to Kendrick Glover.
Thank you, sir.
Kendrick Glover.
Yes.
We're going to check out your information for the GM.
Man, you can find us right now just on Facebook at Glover Empower Mentoring. Actually, today is our 50th anniversary.
Congratulations. That is.
It's a powerful thing. It does not always happen where you see a black man start an organization and that it grows and it grows and it helps the community, and it was designed by the community, it's still led and ran by the community, and it always will be. We're not going to be sellouts. We're not going to do anything for the money. We're really involved in the community and trying to invest in our young people to invest in themselves.
All right. So we're going to have some links to that. Check it out. Dr. Hill, is there anywhere people can reach you at? Check you out?
I don't have a website, but my email is.
My email.
We'll have some information for him. He old school, man. I know what that is. You need to reach me. I reach you.
I was in the 60s.
He's in the 60s. Hey, that's all we have. That's experience right there. Want to thank Miss Danae.
Yeah. That's true.
All right, now.
She did her thing, man.
All right. Barry Crosby, where's the shop at?
529 Central Avenue North.
Yes.
All right, guys, I'm Terry Youngman for Twan the Voice. All right. We want to thank everybody. We want to thank Janice Dawson for all the work that she's been doing.
Her thing,
We
man.
are going to be back the week after next. We will have more for you. The week after next. So we'll keep you guys posted. Everybody, give us a like and a share and a comment in the link below. There's a lot for the page. And also go ahead and check out the Shop Culture page. We appreciate all the traffic that we get from there. And anything else?
Yo, when you guys get the opportunity, check out Candid Thoughts of That Guy. Shop Culture is starting to partner with Candid Thoughts of That Guy, and he has some very unique ideas on a lot of the things that are discussed on the show.
98% of those ideas. But say that.
It's good conversation.
Tell them about the life. Tell them about the life.
Life Jennings and Case are coming to a very, very soulful night out. This is brought to you by Godswill Entertainment and Ocean Records. As you guys remember, Case and Life Jennings were some of the biggest pop stars or R&B stars in the 90s. This going down at the Pantages Theater in Tacoma, and the opening is one of Seattle's own, Mr. Anthony Martin. We will have a link to that.
Shop Culture's RJ the host.
You know what? My bad. RJ, the host, is really tearing it up right now. He is going to be hosting this event, and the infamous DJ Funk Daddy is going to be spinning at this event. There are more details on our page. And the show is on July 27th, Pantages Theater. All right.
All right, guys. Thank everybody for joining us. Danae, Barry, Twan, Janice, this is Terry Youngman saying peace out.
Good show.